Welcome to The Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today because we're looking at a moment that fundamentally broke the mold of global sports. It turns out if we really want to understand modern professional football, the massive contracts, the crazy player mobility, the sheer power dynamics of it all, we literally have to trace it back to one specific dividing line, and that is the 1995 Bosman Ruling. This single legal decision was the earthquake that completely created the modern transfer market. And it all really centers around this pretty provocative question. How exactly did $0 transfers change football forever? Together, we're going to explore the seemingly impossible problem that players faced, the drastic action one man actually took, and the massive, totally unintended impact that rewired the economics of the beautiful game. Okay, let's dive into this. Section 1. Football before 1995. The retain and transfer era. To understand the revolution, we really have to look at how restrictive things used to be. Before 1995, football operated on what was known as the retain and transfer system. And honestly, clubs held all the cards. Even if a player's contract completely expired, like done, finished, the club still owned their registration, meaning they could demand a massive transfer fee from any new club that wanted to sign them. Now contrast that lockdown system with what we know today as free agency, right? That's where a player can just walk to a new employer once their contract ends without a single penny changing hands between the clubs. Section 2. The landmark legal case, Jean-Marc Bosman's fight. So the catalyst for this entire shift was a Belgian midfielder named Jean-Marc Bosman. In 1990, his contract with his club expired, and he wanted to cross the border to play in France. But playing by those old rules we just talked about, his old club demanded a transfer fee that the new club simply refused to pay. When the move collapsed, Bosman's club didn't just block him. They punitively slashed his wages by an astounding 75%. 75%. Trapped and financially penalized, Bosman decided he'd had enough. He took his club, the Belgian Football Association, and eventually UEFA itself to court. 5 years later, in December of 1995, the European Court of Justice delivered the Bosman Ruling. The court declared that the old transfer system was actually a direct violation of the European Union's fundamental principle, the free movement of workers. So they banned transfer fees for out-of-contract players moving within the EU. And then they went a step further. They completely abolished the quotas that restricted the number of foreign EU nationals a team could field. Just like that, the borders were open and the players were finally free. Section 3. The era of player power. 3 clear outcomes. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the massive economic ripple effect this legal victory created across the globe. It shifted the power dynamic fundamentally away from clubs and straight toward the players. It led to 3 very clear outcomes. First, without having to pay multi-million-dollar transfer fees to rival clubs, teams used that saved money to entice those free agents with drastically increased wages. Second, this sudden influx of cash birthed the rise of the modern, highly influential player agent. And third, it enhanced the domestic dominance of wealthier clubs who could now simply outspend smaller rivals for the absolute best out-of-contract talent. We can actually track this power shift over the years with some huge names. Edgar Davids was the first high-profile player to test these waters, moving from Ajax to Milan back in 1996. Then Sol Campbell controversially crossed North London for free in 2001. Robert Lewandowski basically shifted the entire balance of power in Germany by walking from Dortmund to Bayern in 2014. And just recently, Kylian Mbappe engineered a massive free move to Real Madrid. All of these superstars leveraged their new freedom to secure monumental, record-breaking deals. To put that financial explosion into perspective, consider this data point. When Sol Campbell made his free transfer to Arsenal in 2001, he secured a salary of £100,000 a week. Just a decade prior to that, before the Bosman Ruling took effect, literally no player in Britain was earning even £10,000 a week. The wage ceiling didn't just break, it completely disintegrated. And, wherever money flows, middlemen follow. With player earnings skyrocketing tenfold, agents stepped completely out of the shadows. They became absolutely essential negotiators. They were suddenly involved in every intricate aspect of these new free agency transfers, securing massive signing-on bonuses for their clients, and of course claiming much, much larger commissions as their own reward. So the crucial point is Section 4, the widening wealth gap, financial disparity. While this was an incredible, undeniable victory for labor rights, it had profound, totally unintended negative consequences for the sports ecosystem. Smaller clubs were absolutely devastated. Historically, these clubs survived by developing young talent and then selling them for large transfer fees to the giants of the game. Well, the Bosman Ruling stripped away that vital income stream overnight. If a smaller club couldn't afford to renew a star's contract, that player simply walked away for free. Talent inevitably flooded to the clubs with the deepest pockets, making domestic leagues far more predictable than ever before. And hey, this didn't just affect football. Take a look at the Greek Basketball League. Research shows that following the abolition of foreign player quotas across the EU, a huge influx of mid-tier foreign players flooded their league. Clubs prioritized signing ready-made EU citizens over investing in costly local youth development. This created multi-ethnic teams that actually struggled to connect with local fans, causing a notable drop in cultural identity and overall fan interest. Section 5. EU law meets football. Regulation versus tradition. This brings us to a really fascinating clash playing out right now between European policy and the pitch itself. You see, the European Union is fundamentally an economic project. They treat professional football purely as a free market economic activity. Therefore, it is strictly subject to European labor laws and the free movement of workers. From the perspective of EU market regulators, a footballer is frankly no different than an accountant or a chef looking for work across borders. But the sport's governing bodies counter with a very different view, which is famously echoed in the sentiment of this legendary Bill Shankly quote. Football isn't just a business. It performs vital social, cultural, and educational functions. Fans have a deep generational bond with their local clubs that simply doesn't exist with traditional corporate businesses. Treating it purely as a free market commodity completely ignores the traditional structures that make the sport so uniquely valuable to communities. Because of this deep tension, bodies like the European Policy Center have noted that the post-Bosman era is basically defined by constant, ongoing negotiations. The EU Commission and bodies like UEFA have to constantly sit down and hammer out compromises. They are trying their best to balance a legally mandated liberalized market with the protective social characteristics that football actually needs to survive at the grassroots level. Let's move to and see how this builds. Section 6. The future of transfers beyond Bosman. So, where exactly does this leave us today? Well, the transfer market certainly didn't stop evolving in 1995. The modern strategy we see all the time today is the pre-contract agreement. Players with expiring contracts no longer wait until the summer to find a new team. Instead, they use a rule allowing them to sign an agreement with a foreign club up to 6 months before their current deal even ends. This ensures complete stability for the player, while granting them maximum leverage to negotiate the absolute highest salary possible, months in advance. And we might literally be on the precipice of another revolution. Consider the recent Lassana Diarra case against FIFA. This legal challenge focuses on whether players can terminate their contracts early without their new clubs having to pay massive compensation penalties. If this actually succeeds, it could act as Bosman 2.0, granting players even more flexibility to break contracts and move freely, which would force massive regulatory amendments all over again. Which leaves us with a truly vital question to ponder. The Bosman ruling undeniably secured essential labor rights for athletes, freeing them from those old restrictive chains. But as we look at widening wealth gaps and the relentless push for absolute player mobility, will football be able to maintain its traditional balanced competition? Or will total player empowerment permanently tilt the scales, leaving the beautiful game entirely to the highest bidder? It's a fascinating tension for sure, and understanding Bosman is the key to watching it all unfold. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer.